Welcome everyone. It is a virtual consultation organized by the UN Independent Expert on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity on his 2021-2023 work plan. Victor, can you please not to make sure that everyone hear me well? Yes, perfect. Thank you very much. My name is Catherine de Vatz. I'm a human rights officer at the UN Human Rights Office in Geneva, when I'm supporting the mandate on sexual orientation and gender identity. My pronouns are she and her. I'll be moderating today's event, which is being recorded. We're very pleased to see many participants eager to engage with Victor Madrigal-Borloz. The consultation will serve as one of the channels through which the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity will collect views and inputs to inform the preparation of his work plan for 2021-2023. It is open to everyone, and among the participants, I can already see state representatives, civil society organizations, human rights defenders, and many others. This is really fantastic, and many thanks for joining us today. The mandate of the UN Independent Expert on Protection Against Violence and Discrimination based on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity was created in 2016 and renewed in 2019 by the Human Rights Council. In October 2020, the Council extended Victor Madrigal-Borloz's tenure for another 3 years until the end of 2023. Victor Madrigal-Borloz is convening this open consultation to consolidate the mandate's approaches and priorities for the remainder of his tenure. We share the concept notes with guiding questions for this consultation and the draft work plan in advance of the meeting. You will find the links to these documents in the chat. They are also available on the web pages of the independent expert. I'll now pass the floor to independent expert Madrigal-Borloz, who will introduce his work plan for the years 2021 to 2023. Victor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear friends. Catherine, I'm looking at you to see whether you can hear me well. Thank you very much. Dear friends, welcome and thank you for joining us during this consultation on the work plan of the mandate of the independent expert for the period of 2021-2023. I should say that this consultation is being held on a day that is particularly relevant for the mandate, as we are holding today Trans Day of Remembrance. Memory is a powerful tool under the narratives of international human rights law. It's been acknowledged as a powerful driver of reparative processes, as it is widely accepted that establishing, telling, and creating narratives based on truth are powerful elements in individual and collective reparation and great drivers in access to justice and the elimination of impunity. Memory is also a tool to ensure never again to have invisibility or forgetting the sacrifice of many of our siblings around the world who have suffered violence and discrimination based on their gender identity. Throughout this consultation, we will be talking about many things relevant to gender identity and trans lives. I want to mark and to thank you, all of you, for joining the mandate today on this most important day for this consultation. And to all of our trans and gender diverse siblings out there, your fight is our fight, your cause is our cause. We certainly accompany you in your quest for dignity and happiness. Dear friends, this mandate was created with the dedication and the vision of an enormous amount of stakeholders within state and civil society. I believe that its creation marks one of the most momentous processes in the institutionality of the human rights machinery, In 2016, creating heart-stopping moments through 5 votes through the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, and in 2019, providing evidence of the importance of processes of dialogue for a renewal that was largely supported from states and civil society from all over the world. I want to remark that the mandate was renewed with the decided support of the community of states and through the work of a coalition of over 1,300 organizations coming from over 174 countries. I want to mark this consultation very much in the context of such processes and the notion that I wish to impress on you today, that this is a mandate committed to its accountability. Accountability, of course, starts with consulting on the elaboration of plans of work and throughout their execution, and of course, with the rendition of accounts at the end of specific periods. We at the mandate have a series of mechanisms for feedback that I will be concluding my presentation with, and I want to invite all of you to keep yourselves very much engaged through those mechanisms of feedback constantly. It is my hope that both myself and all of the superb team that supports the mandate will always be in an active listening position when it comes to these issues. Now, if you allow me, I will share my screen to actually share with you some of the features of this work plan. And I would actually very much hope that you will be kind enough to help me guide this dialogue today with a series of guiding questions, which were the ones that I have shared with you in the concept note that supported this consultation. Those guiding questions invite you to reflect on whether the narratives of impact that are depicted in the work plan are adequate portrayals of the mandate's added value, whether the document actually has identified all necessary dimensions, principles, and approaches necessary to ensure an intersectional, balanced, and inclusive program for the mandate. It invites you to comment on the thematic priorities identified in the document. It invites you to comment on activities and products as responses to the needs of stakeholders. And finally, it invites you to comment on the interaction with global processes such as Beijing +20, a main process that we all know is in the works right now. So dear friends, at the moment, we are following the thread of resolutions 32 and 4118, which are resolutions that invite and actually create the mandate in a context where the mandate is supposed to analyze, advise the problematic of violence and discrimination as they manifest themselves in the everyday lives of LGBT persons. It's meant to alert UN organs and bodies, to advocate for progress in relation to the furtherance of rights, to activate and mobilize the local and international community, and also to follow up on the recommendations of the mandate. As you know, all of this is done in the context of strict adherence to the notion of independence and objectivity, and not only to the mandate as established in its founding resolutions, but also very importantly, in relation to the standards of efficiency, competence, and integrity. Through that end, the mandate has a series of working methods that it deploys and that we're going to be developing in the context of this presentation. We always talk about the fact that the mandate actually follows a working theory that places the individual in the middle. I like this little graph that I've drew up myself because it actually places and reminds us that everything we do needs to be impactful in the life and the quest for happiness of every person on this earth. Let's remember, dear friends, that every person in this world has a gender identity and a sexual orientation. And that therefore, what we're talking about is the realization of a most human trait and the protection of a most human trait so that we can all together be together and leave no one behind in this quest for happiness. To the end of being impactful in this quest, the mandate is supposed to be doing mainly two things. This is my interpretation, to which I also invite comments. I've always thought that the mandate is supposed to increase visibility of the way violence, discrimination occurs in the everyday lives of persons. And it's also supposed to advise states on effective measures, be it legislative, of access to justice, or public policy. In that sense, the business of the mandate is the business of state responsibility. But to create this advice, to identify this advice, the mandate has the ability to enter into dialogue with the most wide range of stakeholders. And therefore, it interacts with state actors, with civil society, and in general, with any person with lived experience relevant to the idea of furthering the work of eradicating and deconstructing violence and discrimination. This gets translated and made concrete in a series of outputs, which you see reflected in this third level as outputs level 1. These are basically my letters of concern when it comes to communications and claims of individual violations of human rights, my reports of country visits, my statements, and my reports to the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, all of which gets disseminated through these level 2 outputs reflected in this fourth level, which is the social media and public communications program of the mandate. It's to this, dear friends, to this logical structure and also to the comments, to the contents of them, that the mandate welcomes input and also to the content of it. Now, let me go back a little bit to what a special procedures mandate holder of independent expert is. It's been said that a special rapporteur is expected simultaneously to be a human rights activist, a rallying point for human rights, an international diplomat, an academic, and a government advisor. And these are the wise words of Surya Subedi, one of my most distinguished predecessors. To them I add, we're supposed to be also Zoom technicians this day, so that's my little addition to the profile of an independent expert. But speaking in all seriousness, the reality is that that animal described by Surya Subedi doesn't really exist in nature. And so what we all strive to do is we strive to understand at each given point in time, what is it that we can bring to this particular equation? And for the last 3 years, I have attempted to bring particular experience in the field of international human rights law, and also in the idea of creating, nurturing, and maintaining mechanisms of dialogue alive. But of course, this is something that I'm also very much hoping to get feedback on, because special rapporteurs, independent experts, might very well need to modulate their approaches in time in relation to specific needs. And I'm very much hoping to develop a vigorous discussion today with you on what may be the elements of that particular approach. Now, in the equation that I have created, dear friends, Research is a most fundamental element in the way that the mandate carries out its work. In a way, research is the way that I have chosen to provide a backbone to the mandate. The success criteria of research, in my view, is associated with the relevance of the topics that are addressed, the diversity of views that are considered, the excellence of the research process in itself, and the practical use that is given to the research. So far, the mandate has delivered the Muntaphorn underpinnings through reports that have addressed criminalization, anti-discrimination measures, pathologization, legal recognition of gender identity, standards for data gathering and management, and finally, of social inclusion. I call these the Muntaphorn underpinnings because most of them were identified by my distinguished predecessor, Professor Vitit Muntaphorn, and I added to them the particular issue of data. Throughout the period of 2020, I have added two other topics, my reports on conversion therapy and the impact of COVID-19 on LGBT communities, populations, and peoples. Now remains a research agenda that has been formulated with the idea of exploring and digging deeply into the root causes for violence and discrimination, and which includes the idea of a report on gender equality and the use of gender theory for this work of eradication of violence and discrimination, right to health and its connection with Sustainable Development Goal 3, which hopes to provide elements both in relation to that topic, but also a case study of the way in which human rights-based approaches can be connected in a pragmatic way with sustainable development goals and developmental thinking, something that I think is fundamental for the work ahead, particularly in the Global South. I then hope to move on to the deeply relevant issues of colonialism and religion and their impact in the construction of social mores relating to sexual orientation and gender identity. And then finally, friends, at the end of my mandate, I would hope that we are able to carry out a reflection on 12 years of work, joint work on these issues since the issuance of the first report of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in relation to these issues in 2011. There is also my hope to do a further thematic work in relation to peace and security, disparate and particular impact of conflict in LGBT populations and their role in the construction of peace agenda and peacekeeping agendas. That is the research agenda that is laid out before you today, and in which I very much am hoping to consolidate so as to be able to trigger all respective processes. All research is carried out in a process that is pretty much standardized. As you know, I am a visiting researcher at the Human Rights Program at Harvard Law School, and therefore that's usually where our literature reviews are carried out. We then always move around to background notes, to questionnaires that call for inputs, and consultations that then lead to expert meetings. I make this methodology transparent because of its connection to the production of excellence in research. I am very eager to also get feedback in relation to the way that they are regarded as a fundamental enabler of excellence in the research process. Country visits are a fundamental tool of the mandate. And I wanted to share with you that in my view, the success criteria of country visits are associated with the diversity of views considered, the excellence of the overview produced by the mandate, and very important, the practical use of the advice provided. I believe that the mandate can add elements that could be seen as suggestions for blueprints into the future for the countries that I visit. But of course, all of that only is relevant if this blueprint becomes alive and is actually used to be considered. As you know, the mandate has already visited Argentina, Mozambique, Georgia, and Ukraine, and has issued the relevant country reports. And I'm very much hoping to understand whether specific follow-up in relation to these reports is proving to be useful and is proving them to be useful, and very open to constructive criticism in relation to this. For me, the criteria guiding particular state visits depends on 7 elements that I've been able to identify so far. We all know that state acquiescence is a fundamental element. I am not, of course, able to carry out country visit without this foundational element. I then add to that the diversity in country visits, which hopefully provides the mandate's portfolio with coverage of the great cultural, geographical, and legal traditions in the world. The relevance of the mandate's contribution in a particular point in time, the safety and security of all stakeholders, the connection of the issues present in the context with a thematic research agenda, the views of different stakeholders, including civil society, academia, and the United Nations family, as to the usefulness of a visit, and the structure put in place by the state for the consideration of recommendations, meaning the seriousness that can be envisaged in the follow-up process. I also have shared with you that in the coming work plan, a country visit to Tunisia has already been confirmed and only has been postponed because of the realities of created by COVID-19. Cambodia and Sri Lanka are also firm commitments of realization of country visits. And we have then country visit requests for Armenia, Burkina Faso, Colombia, Ghana, India, Japan, Kenya, Nepal, Poland, and Thailand. This is so far what the mandate has provided, but please remember that the allotment of resources provided for the mandate allows for a total of 2 country visits per year, and this is the decision-making process that I'm in right now. The third working method that I wanted to share with you are communications. As you know, communications operate initially in the realm of confidentiality, but are made public after a prudential allotment of time. For me, success criteria in communications is associated with objectivity in fact-finding process, safety of all involved, the mechanism put in place by states for considering the recommendations issued by the mandate, and the practical impact of recommendations. And the document that you have before you has indication about practical impact of recommendations carried out in relation to this issue. These are so far, dear friends, the elements that you see reflected in the work plan that you also had before you. Let me complete this presentation by repeating that this mandate is firmly committed to its accountability. I am aware and very, very much dependent on the independence through which I carry out the decision-making process after due hearing of all relevant views, of which this hearing is part. But independence doesn't mean lack of accountability, and I'm very committed to my accountability And to that end, you have here full transparency of the mechanisms through which I consider feedback, the annual interactive dialogues, the periodic consultations, the periodic consultations for the reports, the dialogue with you and family, the bilateral dialogue with different stakeholders, all of the academic articles and press on the work of the mandate, and finally, the individual commentary that comes up through social media. All of those elements, dear friends, are taken into account in an ongoing and constant process of monitoring and evaluation by the mandate. And I hope that you know that your views expressed in this type of consultation and dialogues become a fundamental part of this process. With this, with the idea of going back to those motivating questions that I repeated at the beginning of this allocution, my hope that this can be the continuation of a vigorous discussion about the way that this mandate brings relevance to the work of states, civil society, human rights defenders, and very importantly, all persons with lived experience of violence and discrimination. I am very, very eager to hear your views, to integrate them, and to continue the work onto 2023. Catherine, thank you very much, as always, for your very kind facilitation. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Victor. We will now move to the question and answers or comments portion of our event. And I'll alternate between persons taking the floor and questions posed in writing. And to that end, I would just like to repeat a little bit how you can participate and engage with the independent expert throughout the event. So you have two possibilities. Either you write a question or a comment using the chat function. And here I would like to apologize because we mentioned the Q&A initially, but the Q&A is actually not available. So you will have to use the chat function to write your comments or questions addressed to the independent expert. And you can write in English, French, or Spanish. And if you want to take the floor, then you can click on participant, the button at the bottom of the screen. And then you can raise your hand. You will have a little blue hand appearing and we'll give you the floor. Then we'll ask you to unmute and to activate your camera if you wish so, obviously. So I see that there are several requests for the floor. So we'll take maybe the three first, Victor, if that's fine with you, and then I'll take a few questions in writing. So the first request comes from Ksenia Kirichenko from ILGA World. Ksenia, you have the floor.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Hi from Geneva. Thank you so much for organizing this consultation. And I actually think that such consultations is one of the best practices developed by Victor and all the OHCHR officers supporting them. So I want to ask about intersectionality, and it's really great that intersectionality is mentioned as basically one of the principles of the overall work of the mandate. At the same time, I noticed that when the principle of intersectionality is described, there are a lot of different grounds mentioned, but not gender. At the same time, we know that probably the next report will be about gender theory. And in this relation, I just wanted to ask Victor, how do you see the gender axis of your work? Then also when it comes to intersectionality, it's also great, like there could be, of course, two different modes of addressing this, either to look into intersectional dimensions of each and every problem, such as violence, discrimination, etc., or to look into specific situations of communities. And if I understand correctly, Victor, you think that it's better to just to have intersectional principle as this like overarching principle. But then the question is, how do you do you see how you can ensure participation of different groups like LGBTI persons with disabilities, LGBTI persons from ethnic community, etc., etc., and specifically how to collect data? Because recently we were discussing this with some organizations, and we understand that the more a group is marginalized, the more layers of oppression people face, the less resources they have for collecting data. And probably the state also is not collecting disaggregated data about this community. So the thing is like how to ensure participation of these groups of LGBTI communities, and how to collect data. And the last point is also about intersectionality and about any plans to engage in the future with a specialized mandates, treaty bodies and special procedures. So I know that, for example, it was a very, I think, constructive discussion with CEDAW, but there are also some other committees, for example, who could address the situation, again, of LGBTI persons with disabilities, for example, the CRPD committee, etc., etc. And at ILGA, for instance, we do some research on treaty bodies recommendations, and we've seen that during the last 6 years, CEDAW made LGBTI recommendations in 54% of recommendations, CRPD, which is about disability, 27%, and CERD, which is about racial discrimination, including ethnic discrimination, it was only 9% of recommendations in relation to people from our communities who are facing also this layer of discrimination. And then, of course, there are like special procedures on disability, on racism, etc., etc. And do you have any plans to also to somehow to cooperate with them outside of communications, of course, to ensure that they also address these things related to intersectional oppression, discrimination, etc.
Thank you very much, Ksenia. The next on the list is Dodo Karsay. Dodo, you have the floor.
Hi, can you all hear and see me now?
Yes.
All right, I can't see myself, but let's just hope for the best. All right, hi everyone. Victor, thank you so much for the consultation, and Catherine for all the support as always. I'm speaking today in my hat as a senior policy advisor to TGEU, Transgender Europe. And we have very much welcomed the list of the research areas that you would like to focus on, and had a couple of specific questions. One, in the region of Europe that TGEU focuses on, but also globally, anti-gender movements have been basically the most pressing concern to our movements right now. In Europe, we have seen the detrimental impact of anti-gender movements and rhetoric in Hungary and Russia in terms of actual legal reform that takes away existing rights of trans people. But also we've seen examples in other countries such as Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, some of the less obvious countries like Finland, Sweden, also Slovakia, Slovenia, Poland, and so on. So the list is very, very long. UK, I forgot to add, very important. The list is very long, and unfortunately we expect that it's just going to get worse and worse. We also see that the rhetoric spreads across borders, and countries encourage or get inspired from previous examples. So one of our questions was, is this something that you're going to address? And if yes, in which thematic report can we expect that to happen? And the other point was we very much welcomed the inclusion of the SDG framework, and that you're going to dedicate a specific report to SDG health, SDG 3 on health. Of course, this is extremely important to trans communities worldwide. And we wanted to ask if you're going to cover depathologization within healthcare, not just in relation to LGR, which is where it's often discussed, but within healthcare itself, if that's on your radar in that report. That is it from me for now. And thank you so much for the opportunity to ask questions and to be part of this really lively consultation. It's much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Dodo. We'll take a third question, and then I'll give you the floor, Victor. So we have a question. We have a request for the floor from Eduardo Pintura Silva. Eduardo, you have the floor.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good
Yes,
afternoon.
we can hear you.
Thank you. So I'm Eduardo from the Mission of Portugal here in Geneva. And I would like to congratulate on behalf of Portugal and thank the independent experts for the very, very valuable work carried out of awareness raising, dialogue with all stakeholders, providing advice and assistance, clarifying concepts and deconstructing misconceptions and prejudices, and contributing to the discussion around the development of policies and actions that protect people from discrimination and violence based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Portugal would like to reiterate its full support to the mandate. We would also like to thank the independent expert for having prepared the work plan and for organizing this informal and open consultation. This is a commendable practice and an example for other special procedures in our view. The document reflects a rigorous work plan to implement the mandate, which Portugal supports. And we would like to provide 3 comments or questions related to the work plan. First, when referring to intersectionality, we would find it important to reinforce the dimension of sexual characteristics, including in the case of intersex persons who remain very much an invisible group. We would also like and welcome that the work plan takes into account specific needs and vulnerabilities of some groups, such as LGBTI migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Then one question. As you know, the European Commission adopted its first ever LGBTI equality strategy for the period 2020-2025. One of its main goals is strengthening the EU's engagement on LGBTI issues in its external relations. Our question would therefore be, also in our role of incoming presidency of the Council of the European Union in the first semester of next year, how the independent expert plan to engage with the EU institutions and the EU member states during the remainder of the mandate, also with a view to developing greater synergies. And lastly, we would also like to ask the independent expert, how does he plan to collaborate with the UN human rights treaty bodies in order to guarantee that LGBTI human rights are also taken into account when implementing the UN human rights conventions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Victor, may I pass the floor over to you again?
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you to Xenia, Dodo, Karsai, and the distinguished representative of Portugal for their questions. I think that there was a common thread in one of the comments and questions, which I'd like to address, and it's the idea of this collaboration with treaty bodies and other special procedures. And it just dawned on me that it was not made very clear in the work plan, and so I think already that this will need to be made very clear, that since the beginning of carrying out the mandate, I've had the purpose of ensuring that during my tenure, I would brief at least once every special procedure and every treaty body of the United Nations. So Catherine, Taro, and I keep a schedule where we actually try and do that each and every time as we go by. We brief our colleagues, my colleagues within special procedures and treaty bodies. And this is, of course, a tactical approach to something that is very substantial, I think, which is the need to ensure that there is an understanding that this, as many other issues, is an intersectional, cross-cutting issue by excellence. The reality is that, as Dodo, Karsai, as Xenia, and I think Eduardo were mentioning, there is a reality in the fact that every treaty body and every special procedure, pretty much without exception, has the possibility of looking at the lens of the communities, populations, and peoples that we talk about when we talk about persons affected by violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And so my hope is that we will be able to do this. Some concrete examples of things that have already come out in relation to this. As you know, on 17 May of this year, 96 special procedures and regional bodies issued a statement in relation to the need to ensure that LGBT persons were made, their lives were made evident and explicitly visible in COVID-19 response and recovery measures. I think that this was a historic statement in the sense that it signaled the acknowledgement of all of these mandate holders of the fact that they have a stake within their mandates when it comes to people's populations and communities that we are talking about. So to me, it's important to ensure that this work on cohesion and collaboration with other special procedures and treaty bodies goes on. And I believe that one of the amendments that I already foresee is that there should be this inclusion of this information in the work plan, because it's something that I would like to ensure that I make myself accountable to all of you in relation to this. Now, this leads me to the overarching issue on how to work on intersectionality that Ksenia raised, Ksenia Sirichenko raised. And I wanted to highlight the fact that in the very design that you gave to this issue in the mandate, you, and I say you in the larger context, of course, the community of states, but then also all of those alive forces of society that were interacting with this process, considered that there should be two guiding principles to the mandate. One of them was dialogue, and the other one was intersectionality. And they speak clearly with a synergy with one another. When it comes to intersectionality, I understand that sexual orientation and gender identity are points of entry into particular experiences of violence and discrimination or privilege. Why not? And the reality is, as one sub-Saharan activist said to me at the very beginning of the mandate, got impressed in my brain so strongly. She said, Victor, we all reunite many identities in one body. And many identities are the ones creating individual experiences of discrimination or privilege. And so to me, sexual orientation or gender identity are a point of entry into the understanding of lived experiences of discrimination and violence. And concretely, to Ksenia Kirishenko, what I would like to answer is, I try to be very pragmatic in relation to this, is I choose different approaches to highlight how this manifests itself. My report on social inclusion included a section on LGBT women and particular concerns of social inclusion of women. Youth has been a sector that has been very active in presenting inputs to the mandate from the angle of youth. So you see it coming in the evidence base that we have. Elder persons, persons living with disabilities, and so on and so forth. I haven't been able to do everything that I would want to do in relation to this, but I would really like to make sure that this is the case. To Dodo Karsai and the real, very real conversation that exists right now in relation to gender and the questioning as to the dimension of gender as largely socially constructed, as self-performative, not operating on the binary concept. We all know that one of the great conversations of our times, it's not that it's one of the great conversations of our sector, it's one of the great conversations of our time, is this particular notion and its applicability on the lived experience of people. And we all know that this is a conversation that in the center is exploring the possibility and ability of contribute to the deconstruction of our, and in the fringes is contributing to discrimination. So I have absolutely no doubt in the importance of this, on the importance of this conversation, and this is why my report on gender equality actually aims at providing some explanations on this. And to Dodo Karzai, what I say is what this report aims to do is to interrogate from a completely objective point of view the contribution of the theory of gender to the work of analyzing, deconstructing violence and discrimination, and to objectively bring to light how is it that that contribution has manifested itself in lives, in particular lives that are free from violence and discrimination. So this is what I'm hoping to do as well. And in relation to depathologization, you know that there are different angles in which this issue has been dealt with already by the mandate, and I view this as building blocks that lead us to particular issues. Depathologization in healthcare in general is one of the issues that I take note. I'm not going to say that the full conceptualization was made, and I will make sure to try and include this in the angles that are explored in the mandate. That conceptualization is not finalized, so it's very clear that it's good that we carry it out at the time. Finally, in relation to the question raised by Portugal as to the equality strategy, I, of course, have been delighted from my position in relation to the issuance of this strategy. And at the moment, I'm studying it very carefully with the purpose of understanding how the mandate will be able to interact with this. Now, the Eurospace has different dimensions, of course, through which the mandate already interacts. I have been briefing institutions, both of the European Union, but also of the Council of Europe, also parliament engagements that we keep on. The mandate operates on the idea of where is bring a value add that is unique. Clearly, there are issues that are being dealt with by regional bodies in a very, very specific and apt way where the mandate would not want to replicate or duplicate those issues. The mandate derives its strength in its global nature, in its specificity, and also in its ability to tap into general and universal narratives. Catherine, I promise that I'll be more succinct in the future, Catherine. I know that I know you well enough to know that the time worries you, so I promise I'll be more succinct in the future.
I think you're very comprehensive in your replies. Well, continue the list of speakers. I see we have a number of requests for the floor. We have an hour left for the consultation, and we also received a number of comments. So we'll try to make sure that you have the opportunity to address everyone, and if possible, not in the way you're asked to actually address comments and interventions at the interactive dialogues at the General Assembly or Human Rights Council, where you have 10 minutes to reply to 60 interventions. So I'll try to take a number of requests for the floor and combine them with a number of questions that may relate to issues that would be addressed in interventions. I'll give the floor to Reverend Brent Oakes. Reverend, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm the Executive Director of Rainbow Faith and Freedom. And first of all, I want to thank Victor for his virtual visit to Canada. It was very energizing for the folks in Dignity Network. So thank you, Victor. And secondly, I want to thank Victor for choosing religion to be one of his topics in 2022. And we certainly know that religion has caused much of the mess that we're in terms of discrimination. I hope that, Victor, you would also challenge religious leaders to step up and to be part of the solution to undo the damage that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend. I then have Mauro Cabral Grispan. Mauro, you have the floor.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Victor. I have just three brief things to say. Every time I say two, then I say three. It's a non-binary thing. One is that we really appreciate, after the consultation on the evaluation of the mandate, the inclusion of point 28 in the possibility, exploring the possibility of having maybe a third point of work focused on trans and gender identity issues. I think that at some point after this debate, and after you have lunch, the weekend maybe, if you want to go to the chat to this meeting and read the comments about trans and gender identity issues, maybe you are going to find out why it's so important. And I really appreciate all the people that have been posting anti-trans speech for the hard work during this meeting, because they made our work incredibly easier. But the last point is, today it is Trans Days of Remembrance, and trans people joining this consultation shouldn't have to be exposed to that kind of language, especially when at the beginning it was said that there was going to be zero tolerance for that. And that's not okay. At the beginning you said that Trans Days of Remembrance was about memory, and it is about that. But it's not only about remembering violence, it's about doing something about violence. Not only violence in the past, but also violence in the present. So I know that I am smiling, but I take this extremely seriously. And I'm sorry for taking the space in your consultation to talk to your, some of the other people here, some of them being friends and allies. We all know that you are afraid of confronting anti-gender activists in person, but please stop contacting us on WhatsApp or privately to express your support. Please be public about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mauro, and thank you for the reminder about hate speech. And I remind indeed all participants to, again, please use the chat function to ask specific questions to the independent expert, and not express any views that might be harmful. And again, I mean, we have a team, and I will remind them to look very carefully at all the questions and comments, to make sure that all those that may amount to hate speech are addressed. Thank you very much, Mauro. I'll give now the floor to Carolina Lopez Perez.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Madrigal. I am Carolina Lopez, lawyer of the IIRESODH. I'm accompanied by Elizabeth Jimenez, coordinator, and by our president, Victor Rodriguez Recia. I'm grateful for this opportunity to participate in this dialogue, especially for me as member of the LGBTQ community. I would like to direct special attention to a particular group that is often marginalized and invisibilized, which indigenous lesbian women. We at IIRESODH have had the opportunity to meet and work close with some women leaders of the community, lesbian women, who, for example, face as a huge problem the fact that they do not have the word lesbian in their language. For them, it's very important to become more visible by actions and thought language. I was wondering how could we address this special situation. Thank you very much, Mr. Madrigal.
Thank you very much, Carolina. I see Matthew Churka. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Hi,
Matthew?
thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Victor. Of course, appreciate all of everyone's work. I know everyone's very thankful. I'm with Born Perfect. We are a legal organization working to end conversion therapy here in the United States, and we work closely with everyone on the team, with the independent expert on a portion of the mandate to support ending conversion therapy globally. I just wanted to add a part of the question that we're seeing here in the US. During COVID, we've passed a total now of 100 laws in the US. That's 20 states and about 84 cities. So we're at 104 laws, and it's been incredible progress here. And what we're looking at going forward as we continue to pass each US state or city as we continue, how can we have the greatest impact on culture to really stop conversion therapy? And we really see it as a top-down effect of people's views on LGBTQ issues. And so we're working with the Family Acceptance Project at San Francisco University and trying to really view the impact of family acceptance, what research we can do to understand and how we can impact families. And I think that it does also really touch intersectionality of religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. And if that's something that would be a part of the mandate that the independent expert or the could see is how can we impact family acceptance globally that would really have a positive impact on how generations to come will be affected by discrimination and violence amongst the LGBTQI community.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Next on my list is Martin Jemtik. Martin, sorry if I need to.
Hello. No, it's okay. It's not an easy one usually. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk. And also I wanted to thank you, Victor, for doing such a great work in the human rights area. It's much appreciated, and we'll definitely support you in your future mandates, and we look forward to collaborating with you in the future. I think first of all, I actually wanted to stand with Mauro, who spoke specifically about the hate speech that we do use, even in this chat, in this consultation. This is something that we should not be accepting and we should not tolerate as well. And that will take me perhaps to the thing that I did want to ask is the terminology that we currently use to describe specifically hate acts towards LGBTQ community, Muslim community, for foreigners and many others. Specifically those, the terms that end with words phobia. As Victor, you may remember, this doesn't really make sense, and we wanted to make sure that this is now going to be changed. So how can we help you, and how will you help us to get this terminology out of the dictionaries, to make sure that the phobia, which is, and generally people that hide behind the specific term, will stop using it as a tool to simply get away with the crime they commit towards the minorities. We wanted to make sure that the violence is going to stop, and the violence is going to be called by its name rather than, again, we feel that at the moment is being used to just to cover the hate crimes they have. So how will you, and again, work perhaps with other organizations across the world to work towards changing the terminology? First of all, how can we get the international human rights laws changed as well, and make sure that, again, when we do have events even like this today, this kind of crimes and just this kind of hateful language will not be used, especially when it comes to the trans community, which is seeing the biggest backlash ever in quite a few decades. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Yeah, and I definitely support this statement. I'll now give the floor to Ireland. Ireland?
Hi, I hope you can see and hear me well. I'm Aoife. I'm from the Mission of Ireland here in Geneva. And I think a lot of questions have already been covered, so I'll just come in quickly to thank the expert and your team for organizing this very useful and substantive consultation, and to reiterate Ireland's strong support for the work of this mandate. This agenda is a key priority for Ireland, and we fully support the work plan that you've presented. We've shared the draft work plan with Dublin, so we may have some input at a later date. If it's possible to give this to you in writing, then we'll provide some further comments. So for now, I'll just say that we particularly appreciate the work plan's focus on intersectionality. This is a key element in Ireland's national LGBTI+ strategy. So we're glad to see that this principle is highlighted prominently in the work plan and also for the substantial and very interesting discussion. So I'll leave it there, and I'll just thank you all again, and we're looking forward to working with you.
Thank you very much. Next on my list is Canada.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. This is Rory Redsup from the Canadian mission here in Geneva also. So I also just wanted to quickly jump in to say that we strongly support the mandate of the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity. The work plan that's been outlined with areas of focus that complement and reinforce one another will help support effective engagement on sexual orientation and gender identity and the rights of LGBTI persons. We're also pleased with the proposed research agenda for 2021 to 2023. It contains a lot of themes that very much align with Canada's domestic and foreign policy priorities. So we look forward to hearing the findings. Two very straightforward questions, I think, that are just kind of follow-ups. We want to know if there will be any follow-up to the mandate's report on conversion therapy in order to just integrate new insights and precedents from states making progress on the issues that were identified. And a second question is just, given the kind of weight and attention and the impact provided by formal findings and country visit reports, has any consideration been given to reallocating resources to increase country visits, the number of country visits that you can do per year, knowing of course that there is this budget issue that might be a hindrance to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rory. And next on my list is Carla Giovannoni. Carla, you have the floor.
Thanks, Catherine, for giving me the floor, and thanks, Victor, for this consultation. We want to thank you, of course, for convening this meeting, and we would like to commend your professionalism and your transparency that has always characterized your work. I think I agree with previous speakers that the way you conduct your mandate, it's exactly an example on how all the special procedures mandates should work. So we are really glad of that. We want to reiterate Uruguay full support to the mandate on the protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Both are indeed an integral part of the mandate, so we want to add our voice to support the gender identity aspect, taking into consideration some comments today in the chat. I think the large number of participants here today is more than a clear reflection also on how important this mandate is for all the relevant stakeholders around the world. And it's also relevant to recognize that in this online format of the consultation, in a way, it also allowed much more participation from NGOs that are not based in Geneva. So that is also something interesting to explore even when we survive all this COVID-19 situation. We want to stress also Uruguay's support to the mandate work program, and we appreciate all the information you have provided today, and we recognize specifically the importance of the intersectionalities approach of the work. We also commend that the mandate's zero tolerance policy to reprisals is taken into account. And we want to commend as well the intense cooperation of the mandate with the Organization of American States. And we hope and we encourage you to keep strengthening that cooperation and that technical support. We are glad also of the confirmation of some country visits. We hope that it's safe soon, so you can restart your visits, and that the states that haven't responded to the country request do it soon. And we want to express also our support to the themes that you have selected for the next researches. I think you have done already a quite comprehensive presentation. Maybe what I would like to ask, if maybe hear your views, Victor, on how we could make a better use of the interactive dialogue that we have annually in the HRC. I think this year was quite challenging. I know we weren't satisfied at all about the format of the interactive dialogue, and I think we all hope you can come back to Geneva in person next year. But maybe there's a way of encouraging states to make also a better use of the interactive dialogue, for example, to share on follow-up when in the case of the states that received country visits, for example, to follow up on the recommendations and also to share with practice, etc. And if there are any further comment you would like to say on how states can support you and your mandate, also regarding the need to raise more awareness on the importance of putting an end to violence and discrimination. Thank you, Victor, and you count with our support.
Thank you very much, Carla. And before hearing from you, Victor, I'll just like to highlight a number of questions or comments that were posted in the chat. So one relates, many relates to intersectionality, actually. One relates to refugees from the Global Refugee Women Leader Network, and asking how the mandate of the independent expert will develop close collaboration with UNHCR, concretely with the pledge made by the different states during the Global Refugee Forum of December 2019, highlighting the importance of intersectionality with the LGBTIQ refugees, internally displaced people, and people seeking asylum, mentioning that human rights must be at the core of the cooperation between you and UN entities. Another one on racism, again, highlighting, asking actually how the mandate recognize and respond to anti-Black racism as it connects to all LGBTQI issues. Again, with regard to indigenous, a specific point that's been mentioned in several comments is how and if the research of the independent expert will take into account indigenous methodology, as the absence of indigenous perspective is what actually fuels the notion of LGBT content as a Western-driven agenda. So really trying to incorporate the methodology. And two more questions. One with regard to gender expression. A question whether the issue of gender expression is going to be more addressed by the mandate, because for the time being, it's being quite absent in the conversations. And a comment to the extent that gender expression often leads to experiences of violence and discrimination. So mentioning the context of Zimbabwe, where visibility and safety and security of persons is intrinsically linked and is often, and it's often actually how LGBTI persons express their gender, which has dire consequences. And another issue, which is a little bit linked, is with regard to criminalization. So it's Eagles for Life, supporting the call for a world free of criminalizations by 2030, mentioning Kenya as an example, which is a country that continues to criminalize same-sex sexual conduct and where a legal challenge to criminalization is currently on appeal. I'll leave it here and give you the floor, Victor.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Let me start this segment by making a couple of reflections about what this forum is, what it should be, and what it's not. This forum is a unique construction, and it is my enormous privilege that I'm able to convene such a unique structure. It's an informal space where representatives of ultimate power holders, such as states, representatives of civil society organizations, in many cases international and wide scope, but also with the most local expression, and also persons with lived experience expressing their individual voice. I doubt that in the construction of international institutions, you'll find many examples where mandates have been given the legitimacy and the power of convening such a forum. It's my privilege, and it's also my responsibility that I'm able to convene such fora. In that connection, at the beginning of this segment of the forum, it was established that there would be a zero tolerance for hate speech. Now, I'm not sure that my team and I are wondering whether we actually need to express to the human rights community what we understand by hate speech, but given that a discussion around that has come up, I'm going to let you know that we completely ascribe to the definition that is included in the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, a document adopted in May of 2019 by the UN Secretary General. According to that instrument, hate speech is understood as, I quote, any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of who they are, and, in other words, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other identity factor, often rooted in and generates intolerance and hatred, and in certain contexts can be demeaning and divisive. Now, as we all know, rather than prohibiting hate speech as such, international law prohibits the incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence. This aspect of generating intolerance and hatred, and in certain contexts being demeaning and dividing, is particularly important for me in relation to fora such as this. I want to be very clear to the extent that there is an enormous respect that we afford to freedom of expression and opinion. But on the other hand, the defense of the forum is something that is important as part of the responsibility of the mandate. Now, there was an invitation that I read the chat. All of you now have doctorates in Zoom. You understand that a person in my position is not following the chat. It's the team that supports me that is doing that. But I will read the chat when that comes to it, and I will form an opinion as to whatever may have been going on there. Having said that, I'm going to make a statement in relation to the applicability in relation to provisions of hate speech, but also very important, the preservation of the forum. We are working towards the goal of today providing feedback into the work plan of the mandate of the independent expert, and we do so in an awareness of our joint interest in eliminating violence and discrimination. We also do so in our conviction that only mutual respect can be a lasting foundation for true dialogue. So having said all of that, and in the awareness that I've heard that there has been a number of expression to which a number of participants have taken offense, I want to make sure that participants understand that on one hand, we will be studying the expressions that have been used. The team is continuing to monitor activity in that connection. And finally, I want to exhort all participants to make sure that we understand that defending the forum is also important, that ensuring that an environment of mutual respect is important. Catherine, of course, I will hope that this is also clearly part of what the team is following up on for the remainder of the time here. Now, let me start by addressing again, beginning in the very last expressions. To Carla Giovagnoni of Uruguay, thank you so much for this very, very clear and continuing support to the mandate. Is something that I say I don't have for granted, and I extend it also to Ireland and to Canada when they have expressed these issues. To Carla Giovannoni, in relation to the interactive dialogue, I hope that we are able to work together in relation to the methodologies. One of the experiences that I have is that there's a possibility that the interactive dialogue be really interactive if certain conditions are provided. And one of them is, of course, the continuity in the dialogue. This year was really, really challenging because it was segmented in 3 parts. As you know, I wasn't very pleased about that. I think I made that very clear in my statement, in my closing statement. We were all trapped by the fact that perhaps we didn't really understand what this methodology will entail. But the other thing that I think makes it very, very relevant is that I hope that more and more states would be in the position of actually bringing more of the view of how they intend to use the report that has been produced, and how they view that there are facilitating factors for them to use the report and facilitating factors for the implementation and the use of the reports internally. So hopefully this can be kind of a guiding principle that we all abide by, is that the interactive dialogues around how the report is going to be used and given context by the state. And with that, I connect to the comment by the representative of Canada, who was expressing that conversion therapy, was asking what would be the follow-up in relation to conversion therapy. And to mention that I think that this is deeply connected to the call that I have made for a global ban on conversion therapy. Now, you all know that I don't think the mandate is in a good position to actually carry out campaigns. That's not what I think is the core business of the mandate. But hopefully what we can do is that this call can be picked up by a coalition of stakeholders, a coalition comprised of states and non-state actors that can actually take forward the idea of a global ban. A lot of work has to be done in that connection. And I think a multi-state, multi-stakeholder coalition involving all elements in the United Nations family will be an interesting way to take forward the report on conversion therapy. To me, that is the follow-up, of course, in relation to these issues. As to country visits, nothing would give me more pleasure than to be able to do more. This is a question of the way that the structural support to the mandate is created. One of the things that I'm always very much hoping is that states that have a particular interest to obtain the advice of the mandate may invite the mandate for an advisory visit, which is focused on a particular theme rather than a full country visit. I think that that would be an interesting way to create more opportunities for engagement. And as you know, I'm very keen to develop a program of promotional visits. Hopefully I can carry out as many as 18 in the remainder 3 years of the mandate. And promotional visits are very, it's a very particular type of visit where fact-finding doesn't go on, but it's more elaborating, but they can have the possibility of creating fora where states and civil society meet together and are able to carry out some work in relation to issues. So I'm hoping that that would be the case. And of course, if the 5th committee, I think is the one creating the entitlement, ever changed my PBI and gave me the possibility of doing 6 country visits, I'm looking at Catherine. I know that she would be delighted that that's the case. And I am going to be delighted if that's the case as well. So you have our full support in that motion for the 5th committee of the General Assembly to go forward. The point brought up by Martin Mechiek is a very important one. I think that the idea that phobia relationship, I think, Martin, you have already communicated to the mandate some views in relation to this. I found them intellectually stimulating in relation to this, and it was never a driving part of the mandate's work in relation to this. And I'm not really sure that it could be the mandate's call to actually go beyond what the current status of international human rights law is in that connection. But what I can tell you is we will accompany the work and we will provide support to any initiative that is conducive to actually providing the right classification and category to views, also based, when those views are based more on discrimination and aspect. And to Matthew Shirka, and Matthew, of course, you played such a significant role in expertise in the conversion therapy report. You know that these dynamics are all interacting with each other. I'm very hopeful that what we can create through the mandate's thematic work and the work in relation to country-based work and promotional is a sort of energy that will actually be working to create some impact into very specific issues, but very importantly, also be a driver for social change. When I presented my first report to the Human Rights Council, the South African ambassador raised this issue in the most wonderful way. She expressed that in her view, the mandate's work was, of course, international human rights law, but that she saw it connecting with social change. And how can I relate to that is very much on understanding the role of explaining to people what international human rights law is and applying that understanding in the specific dynamics of the mandate. So I see that the impact on social change and culture is part of the measure of success of the mandate. And this is where I would like to hopefully create a conversation in my evaluation processes. And with that, I go back to a question raised by Benjamin, by choice, who was asking whether it would be possible to disaggregate on the one hand discrimination and on the other one violence. And no, I don't think it's possible. And I think what happens is that we're talking about great dynamics of social change in which I conceive my 23 reports like a long report that we then, for pragmatic reasons, we cut in half. And we look at extreme forms of violence, loss of life, attacks to personal integrity, attacks to liberty as one point of entry, and we look at social exclusion as another point of entry, and we basically use the structure of the reports to cut that in half and to use the reports to that. And that I used to connect with Gloria Cariaga's fabulous point, which, Gloria, I forgot to mention, that it would be important to also have this report in mind when we look at specific crimes against LGBT persons. I think it's part of that overview. I then go to Carolina Lopez, and I think it's a very important point, very much driving to intersectionality. And I know that the Institute, and of course, Victor Rodriguez is known to everyone through his work, not only at the Inter-American System, but also in the institutionality of the UN, Prevention of Torture, Human Rights Committee, and so on and so forth. I think that nobody better than Victor understands the way that intersectionality within these concerns lies. And in particular, when it comes to lesbian women, to bisexual women, to trans women, what I'm hoping to do is to lift the visibility of the way in which violence actually manifests themselves when it comes to them, and that I am able to provide with examples from the lived experiences of these women to ensure that they bring collective thinking into the collective awareness of people that are coming into interaction with these reports, right? Having said that, to me, the key to this, Carolina, is the interaction with Beijing +25. There is a logic that is, to me, so clear in ensuring that the call made by Beverly Palezza 25 years ago, Gloria Cariaga was there, when she asked to remove the brackets in the World Conference around sexual orientation, was basically the call to ensure that women's issues would become essentially also LBT issues, and that LBT issues would be understood essentially as women's issues. And I think that that thread of work is the one where that intersectionality is going to be found. So I'm hoping that the Institute, Carolina, will be a partner in relation to that conceptual development and the conceptual development in the linking up with the Beijing +25 process. Some of the questions related by Catherine that were issued in writing. One of them is very specific, gender expression. Now, let me be transparent, because that will allow you to give me some feedback that is also transparent. I see gender expression as a component of gender identity, as an inextricable component of gender identity. And in that sense, I am always very dubious of the collective experience that we created at the Inter-American system when we made such a separation between gender expression and gender identity at the level of normative and at the level of interpretation, legal interpretation. I acknowledge, of course, the existence and the importance of argumentation and constructions relating to gender expression, but I have always been very reluctant myself to bring that forth as an independent concept in already what is a complex set of conversations surrounding this issue. I may be wrong, and this is why it's useful that we have these conversations. I don't think I have ever expressed myself so clearly in relation to this, so allow me to put a question mark around these issues. If there's any particular reason why you think an emphasis on gender expression is something that brings an added value to this work, I would be really amenable to understand it and to hear it. This has been my thinking so far. I remember very clearly when I was presenting the Inter-American approach to the Permanent Council of the OAS already, some 15 years ago. There was a discussion going on for what was probably, I don't know, 3 hours about whether gender expression, existed. And I always thought to myself, I wonder if this is where the discussion should lie, or whether we should be more thinking that expression as a content of identity should be part of the redux here. But you're all very welcome. I really mean it. I have an invitation here for an understanding as to how gender expression could be the receiver of particular lines of interest and work. Indigenous methodologies. I want to open the receptiveness of the mandate in relation to this. It's not an area that I'm an expert. I say that in due humility or simple expression of my limitations. We have tried to be as receptive as we can to indigenous communities, populations, and peoples in the different angles of work that we carry out. But I acknowledge that it's not enough. And one of the limitations that I acknowledge in this connection is the extent to which we are able to take them from just generators of examples to generators of theories that can have a certain universality. I hope that I express myself well when I say that. For example, in the report on gender, you see a number of examples brought forth by indigenous communities in relation to gender acceptance, but I think that the work of elaborating a theory that unites all of those lived experiences into a universal lived experience is something that is not there yet by the mandate. I would be absolutely interested in carrying that out, particularly with the reports that are coming on colonialism and religion. I think it would be possible to have those approaches and to take them forward. I'm very mindful of the time. I want to make sure that I answer questions, but also that I do. Mauro, I very much appreciate the point that you brought forth. I hope that you saw it answered in my answer. I will make sure to be responsive to your invitation to read the chat. You said after I have lunch. Well, I'm not sure that that's the determining factor, but I want to make sure that you understand that this is the case. Catherine, I think that this is pretty much where I am in terms of the questions.